Okay. All right, welcome everyone. Please find your seats if you haven't already. We are so excited to see you all tonight. Thank you for coming to our Line 5 tunnel event, a masterclass on rejecting the Line 5 oil tunnel. My name is Ashley Rudzinski, and I'm the Climate and Environment Program Director for Groundwork Center for Resilient Communities. Can y'all hear me okay? All right, perfect. And hopefully those on the live stream can as well. We're just so grateful to each of you who chose to show up here tonight at the Alluvion here in Traverse City, and those who are joining us from across the state. We are just so incredibly moved by the fact that you came and that you're showing up on this issue so consistently. And this campaign has spanned more than a decade, so we know that it's not easy to keep showing up in these spaces, but building that durable and lasting movement on Line 5 is really going to be what it takes to shut down the existing dual pipelines and reject this oil tunnel proposal. So it's going to take each and every one of us, and it starts with being here tonight. Now, Groundwork decided to host this event in partnership with our pals at Oil and Water Don't Mix, Sierra Club, and Progress Michigan, in the wake of the decision that was made by the Michigan Public Service Commission to greenlight the Line 5 tunnel permit. You can feel free to boo. And of course, that decision is still being appealed. But in the wake of that, we got a number of questions like, is this potentially a better solution than the existing dual pipelines? Is this actually safe? And how could the Michigan Public Service Commission greenlight this if it's not in fact safe? And those are really good questions that we're going to hopefully bring some answers to here tonight. So behind me, we're going to switch this slide, is the agenda for the evening. We're going to hear from our incredible panelists in just a minute on a range of topics pertaining to the tunnel, and then we'll save the final 30 minutes at the end for all of your audience questions and answers. Unfortunately, we're only going to be able to take questions from our audience that's here at the Alluvion tonight, so if you're tuning in online and have some burning questions after the event, please feel free to reach out. We really want to answer those questions for you and look forward to hearing from you. Now, before I introduce our panelists, I really want to caution you all not to forget about the other 640.5 miles of the Line 5 pipeline that are outside the straight section in question here tonight, because I want to remind you that this 70-year-old pipeline crosses more than 400 wetlands, streams, and rivers on its way through Wisconsin and Michigan from Canada on its way back into Canada. Line 5 has already spilled 33 different times and has spilled more than 1.1 million gallons in its lifetime since 1968 when it was built. And every day that it operates, Enbridge makes an estimated $1.8 million. And so they've got a major incentive to keep this pipeline running and to say whatever they need to say, including that they'll actually build this pipeline to keep that cash and the oil flowing. So tonight, our expert panel is going to share more about this proposal and why it's so wrong for Michigan. But please remember that this may all just be a dangerous distraction on Enbridge's part, and at best, it's new 99-year oil infrastructure that's aimed at making it even easier to burn fossil fuels at a time when we know we need to be doing the exact opposite thing. So first this evening, you're going to hear from Sean McBrearty with Oil and Water Don't Mix, who will provide a brief historical overview of Line 5 and some of the highlights on our campaign to date. And Sean has been part of this campaign since its inception. He started out as a canvasser with Clean Water Action and swiftly moved into their program, policy, and legislative work, serving as their policy and legislative director for many years before becoming their state director this previous year. He has bird-dogged Enbridge at just about every turn, and I would assume that if anybody at Enbridge's offices have a dartboard, it's Sean's face that's on it. So he's going to give us an overview of that current state of the campaign, along with some of those challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. And next, we're going to hear from Dan Bock, who is the first assistant for natural resources and tribal law for the Attorney General's Environment, Natural Resources, and Agriculture Division. Dan has been an environmental lawyer for the state of Michigan for 16 years with a focus on legal issues that are related to our natural resources. He recently argued Michigan's Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals case on behalf of the state of Michigan and left folks in the viewing room cheering, which if you know about like a lot of procedural trials, that's not very common. So kudos to Dan. Tonight, he's going to be sharing an important legal update on that status of the Line 5 litigation. And after that, we're going to hear from Brian O'Mara, who is a nationally recognized geological and technical expert with over 30 years of experience in consulting and construction management support. He's worked thousands of hours as a resident inspector and staff engineer for various deep tunnel and shaft projects in the Great Lakes region, and testified as an expert witness in the recent Michigan Public Service Commission appeal in case in 2023. He'll highlight some key technical safety and engineering issues with the tunnel proposal, that sharing directly from his professional experience. After that, we're going to hear from Denise Keele. Denise has spent much of her career as an associate professor of political science at Western Michigan University. She founded the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition and was the first recipient of the Michigan Climate Action Network's first Climate Champion Award. And that, yeah. And apparently receiving that award must have had some kind of effect, because now she runs the entire Michigan Climate Action Network. So she's going to share an important update from MyCan on their ongoing Michigan Public Service Commission appeal, and talk about some of the overarching climate concerns that are associated with the tunnel proposal. And finally, she's not here yet, but she will be joining us on stage soon. We're going to hear from Holly Bird, who has graciously stepped in for Frank Edwagishik. He had a last-minute medical emergency, and so we are just very grateful to have her here tonight. Holly is a Traverse City-based attorney, judge, and water protector, and Indigenous activist with an abundance of grassroots organizing experience. She served as the ground coordinator and co-executive director for the Water Protectors Legal Collective, which was the leading legal service at the Dakota Access Pipeline protest in support of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Holly co-directs Title Track here locally, and she'll be sharing her perspective on the Line 5 tunnel and its threat to tribal sovereignty, along with our need to uplift the need to protect our natural resources for future generations. So obviously with this panel, there is going to be a lot to unpack here this evening. Line 5 is an extremely complicated issue with a lot of litigation, permits, permit appeals, multiple treaties, as well as, of course, a healthy dose of politics in a critical election year like this one. So before we dive into all that nuance, I just want to take a moment to remind you all of why you actually came here tonight, because what really got us to leave our homes and skip our kids' soccer games or leave some dirty dishes in the sink are really those bigger picture things. Yes, it matters that the Line 5 tunnel will translate to 27 million metric tons of carbon in our atmosphere. And it matters that in Enbridge's proposal, the company took boring samples from the Straits of Mackinac only every 950 feet, when we know that the industry standard is every 50 to 200. It matters that every day that the tunnel is being constructed, Enbridge wants to discharge more than 5 million gallons of wastewater into Lake Michigan. But at its core, our work to shut down Line 5 and reject the proposed oil tunnel isn't about those hard numbers and the stats. It's about protecting our Great Lakes and our future. And so we know that you're here tonight because you care about whitefish and wildlife, and you care about our kids and their climate future. And you know that it's completely unacceptable to allow Enbridge to continue to imperil 20% of our world's fresh water, because what the hell are we going to drink if Line 5 ruptures or if the tunnel explodes? So we're going to dive deep here tonight because we have to. And as we do, I really invite you to reflect on why you showed up here tonight, because both the facts and your drive to protect our Great Lakes are very important. We have so much work to do to be able to counter Enbridge's millions of dollars in advertising across our state. And we're not going to be able to win this without the conviction to show up and without the heart that was at the center of your decision to show up. We're also not going to win with just the facts, even though they fall so squarely on our side. And so tonight, I hope you each leave here equipped with both the knowledge and the hope that you need to continue this fight and to act as a community ambassador to help shut down Line 5 and reject this oil tunnel proposal, because it's going to take both of those things. We're really excited to uplift some core moments of hope and to highlight just a few of the incredible champions at the heart of this, like Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel and her administration. We're going to share a little bit more about the very real challenges that lie ahead on this campaign, because this fight is far from over. And so we hope to leave you all with the information that you need to confidently reject the Line 5 oil tunnel for yourself, and make sure to be able to communicate to others whether or not you care about our climate, our tax dollars, the sovereignty of tribal nations across Michigan and the United States, as well as the health of our Great Lakes. And so with that, I'm so honored to turn it over to Sean McBrearty with Clean Water Action and Oil and Water Don't Mix. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley, for that wonderful introduction to this. So I'm going to jump right into it with some Line 5 background, and I'm going to focus in today really on the story of the tunnel. So the story that Enbridge built around reasons that why in a climate crisis it's somehow a good idea to build an oil tunnel underneath 20% of the world's fresh water. But to begin with, so yesterday, Enbridge Line 5 turned 71 years old. It was the April 23rd, was the 71st anniversary of the easement that the state of Michigan gave Enbridge back in 1953. Line 5, as we all know, 645-mile long pipeline that runs from Sarnia, Ontario, runs to Sarnia, Ontario, from Superior, Wisconsin, using Michigan as a shortcut for Canadian oil. When this pipeline really started to become the major issue that it is now in Michigan, and also I think it's important we don't forget Wisconsin and the Bad River Band, on whose land Enbridge has been trespassing for the last 10 years. But this fight really picked up in the wake of the Kalamazoo oil spill. And what we learned about Enbridge in the Kalamazoo oil spill was really devastating. Enbridge testified in Congress that Line 6B, which is 20 years, which at that point was 20 years younger than Line 5, by the way. They testified that Line 6B was in perfect condition just weeks before the rupture. They knew about the cracks that had formed in Line 6B that eventually led to the rupture. In the aftermath of that rupture, it took Enbridge 17 hours to shut down the pipeline. And they actually increased the pressure in the pipeline while it was spilling because they misread their own gauges and they thought they were seeing blockage in the pipeline, not a hole in the side of the pipeline. So they increased the pressure. That's how they got to 1 million gallons of tar sands spilled into Talmadge Creek and the Kalamazoo River. Safety procedures have not changed at Enbridge. We've seen, and Brian, I'm sure will share later some of the slipshod work that they've done in planning this tunnel. But so for years, and I see some folks here tonight who were there at the beginning in 2013 when folks really started paying attention to Line 5, and Northern Michigan, has always been a hotbed of people who care about the Great Lakes and want to see this pipeline shut down. We started building something in 2013, and by 2018, we had Dana Nessel running for Attorney General, which, by the way, we have some excellent representation here for the state of Michigan. This tax dollars well spent on lawyers like Dan and his boss, who's been with us from day one. 2018, we had Attorney General Nessel and Governor Whitmer both pledged to take action on Line 5, and both get elected, promising to protect the Great Lakes like that. So in the aftermath of, for the first several years of this fight, from 2013 to 2018, there was really no mention of an oil tunnel under the Great Lakes. That sounds fantastical. In fact, the first time I heard about an oil tunnel under the Great Lakes, I thought it was just some weird fantastical notion that somebody came up with that would never actually be proposed. What kind of an idiot would build an oil tunnel under the Great Lakes? And that was in about 2017. And, Enbridge's message the entire time was that they have a perfectly safe pipeline in Line 5. They told the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board under Governor Snyder, they told the Pipeline Safety Advisory Board that Line 5 is in just as good shape today as it was when they put it down there in 1953. So, apparently they've used magic metal that doesn't corrode with time. Just as good, 70 years later, essentially 65, I think at that point. So for years, they had been talking about they have a safe pipeline here. Then the anchor strike on April 1st, 2018. A tugboat anchor struck line 5, left 3 large gouges in the side of the pipeline. And we came very close to disaster. The gouges were almost as thick as the metal of the pipeline itself. So we came very close to a rupture with line 5. Again, to Enbridge's safety record, they never shut down the pipeline after the anchor strikes, and all 3 of their detection mechanisms failed. First, they have an audio detection mechanism where their control center should be able to hear a 10,000-pound anchor striking a pipeline, and that failed. They didn't hear it. They ran a pig through the pipeline, which is something that is supposed to be able to pick up dents and things like that and abnormalities in the walls of the pipeline. The pig didn't pick up the 3 gouges in the pipeline. It took Enbridge 2 weeks to get a remotely operated vehicle that could dive down to look and actually get eyes on the pipeline, because their ROV at that point was stationed in Florida. 2 weeks, and they never shut down the pipeline out of caution once during that time period. But after that, they did change their message, and their new message became, we're going to encase it in a state-of-the-art tunnel and make a safe pipeline safer. And we've been, of course, hearing that message ever since. And so at first, this project was, when this project was first proposed, there were all sorts of different ideas about how it could be built. The design that Enbridge is pitching now was actually not the design they initially settled on, and they looked at all sorts of different potential tunnel designs back in 2018. What they, and I'm sure Brian will get into some of these details as well about, some of the problems with the design of the tunnel that they've actually proposed here. So in 2018, we saw that kind of message change. And then in October of 2018, it was October 1st, 2018, or right around there, Governor Snyder announced the tunnel deal with Enbridge, where, he crafted some last minute deal to allow Enbridge to build a tunnel through the Great Lakes, to build an oil tunnel under the Great Lakes, rather. And, one great thing was just a story I have to include on that part. We knew that Governor Snyder was going to be announcing this. So days before the announcement, I was on the phone with then candidate Attorney General Dana Nessel, who was planning on doing a fundraising trip out of state when Snyder was going to be making the announcement. And I was calling to see if she'd stand with us at a press conference to call out the tunnel on the day it was announced. And she said, well, I'm supposed to make this fundraising run. Hold on 1 second. Calls me back 5 minutes later. I've canceled the fundraising run. We'll stand with you and oppose the oil tunnel. Just kind of a nice tangent there. So this tunnel deal was signed in October. And then, of course, during the lame duck legislative period in 2018, when Governor Snyder was on his way out of power, he pushed through the tunnel deal as legislation to kind of make it easier and to enable to create the Mackinac Straits Corridor Authority, which is a body that is supposed to oversee construction of the tunnel. They will, I'm sure we'll get into some of the problems with that situation as well as we go on here today. Now, moving on from there, so the tunnel was, kind of premeditated in early 2018. They passed the legislation in December of 2018, and then kind of we saw that message shift. Enbridge was terrified of the people who had just been elected, Attorney General Nessel and Governor Whitmer, to the extent where they essentially bought up all the multi-client lobbying firms in Lansing that they could, before either of them took office, just getting ready. And so the tunnel has always been a message, and I know there's always been, different ideas about whether or not they're actually serious about building the tunnel. And I will say one of the things that happened last year makes it clear that Enbridge is at least seriously thinking about building the tunnel, if not actually planning to go through with this. And that is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission basically granted Enbridge permission to recoup the money that they invest in building the tunnel by charging their clients more. So who their clients are, Enbridge is, basically a middleman. You can think of them as a drug mule moving things across the border. It's actually what they do. They don't own the oil. Yeah, they don't own the oil. They don't refine the oil. They just transport the oil. So they will be charging the oil companies more to make up for the money that they spend building a Line 5 tunnel. And they, again, got approvals from Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to do just that. And one of the big things that we're going to run into here that I'm hopeful we're not going to run into, but so far this is a thing we are running into, is that nobody really except Brian and a couple other people are actually reviewing Enbridge's tunnel proposal in detail. The Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy actually only looked at their permits, only look at the north and south shore. They did not look at where the actual tunnel is going to go or that part of the plan. Their authority extends for them to look at the plan. They decided not to. The Michigan Public Service Commission also did not do a thorough review and look at Enbridge's actual tunnel design plan. They really didn't look at that thoroughly. And so far, the scope proposed by Army Corps for the environmental impact statement only includes reviewing Enbridge's data, not analyzing it themselves. So essentially taking Enbridge's word for it. So we're at a real risk of this project being permitted with nobody actually reviewing the plans, which, for several reasons we'll get into, are not workable. And thank you very much. I'm looking forward to questions. I'll pass it to Dan, correct?
Yes. Yep. Advance the slide as well.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Sean. Excellent background info. And hi, everybody. As Ashley said earlier, my name is Dan Bock. I'm essentially Assistant Division Chief of the Environmental Division of the Attorney General Department. It's been I wish it wasn't necessary, but somebody has to be litigating this. I've been felt very blessed that I've been able to be involved in it, just because this is exactly the type of case that people like me go to law school hoping to do someday, right? Is to do meaningful work trying to protect the Great Lakes, protect the natural resources. And want to start off by saying thanks everyone for being here. Thanks to Ashley and Sean and Groundworks and Oil and Water Don't Mix for putting on this great event. And I'm just really glad to see so much interest in this. So thank you all for being here. Next in line, Dana Nessel wanted to be here. That was, she wanted to be here, couldn't make it due to a scheduling conflict. So she asked me to fill in. So you're stuck with me. I'm sorry. Sort of like the wish.com version of the Attorney General. But I'll do my best to fill in and basically provide a legal update as to the litigation that's been going on for, it's been, next month will be 5 years now since we first filed the lawsuit. So as Sean mentioned, Dana Nessel elected in November of 2018, took office January of 2019. I believe it was May of 2019, we filed the lawsuit against Enbridge that is still at this point tied up figuring out which court is going to decide it, right? And that's due to some very unusual procedural maneuvering, which we argued last month in the Sixth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals in Cincinnati. Sean was there. There was an amazing turnout. There was a rally. I think I heard there were 90 people who bust down. I was very impressed to see so many federal jurisdiction and removal procedure enthusiasts making the trip from Michigan down to Cincinnati to listen to that argument. But I think that was kind of one of the jokes we had, was like, this is sort of a dry and boring legalese procedural argument, but it was the subject matter. And I thought it really showed how strongly people feel about this and what an important issue it was to have such a phenomenal turnout. That was just great. And so the main question that I get when I talk to people about this lawsuit is essentially what's going on, right? Where is the case now? How did it get there? And where is it going? And so I'll just give a little bit of background. So we filed the lawsuit against Enbridge in the summer of 2019. And we essentially argued three overarching things. First, that the easement agreement and the pipeline's location in the bottomlands of the Straits of Mackinac violate the public trust doctrine. Anybody here not familiar? Anybody? Public trust doctrine, kind of I think a lot of people hear about. That's the legal principle that dates back to Roman law and then was adopted at English common law and then American common law, that says that navigable bodies of water belong to the people and are held in trust for them by the government. And what's interesting about that is there's a U.S. Supreme Court case from the 1890s that's been the law ever since, that says that a state cannot actually convey away navigable bottomlands unless it makes certain findings. It has to find that the conveyance, the sale or gift or lease in this case of bottomlands will not impair or negatively harm the public trust, meaning the public's right to navigate and use that body of water, or in fact, that it will help the public trust, right? And in this 1953 easement from the state to Enbridge for $2,500, by the way, for a perpetual easement was the price. A very good deal. Those findings were not made. And so argument number one is that the easement was invalid from its inception. And the case that's based on, in the 1890s, the US Supreme Court decided this case, Illinois Central Railroad Company versus the state of Illinois. Very similar thing there. The state of Illinois legislature decided to essentially give a large amount of Lake Michigan submerged bottomlands to this railroad company. Subsequently regretted it and sued and said, we want our bottomlands back. It was not legal because those are the people's land. We had no right to give it away unless we first made a formal finding that it would comply with the requirements of the public trust doctrine. And the Supreme Court agreed with the state of Illinois and said, yeah, you have to, the conveyance was not valid. We have the same exact argument here. Those findings were not made in the 1953 easement between the Michigan Conservation Commission, now the DNR it's called, and Enbridge's predecessor. At the time, it was Lakehead Pipeline Company, okay? So that's argument number one. And interestingly enough, there are other conveyances of Great Lakes submerged lands from around that same time in the mid-50s that did make those findings, but they're conspicuously absent from this easement. And so our primary argument, first and foremost, was, under the public trust doctrine, that easement was never valid to begin with. That's number one. Additionally to that, we argue that the location of the pipelines in the Straits violates the public trust doctrine, as well as creates a common law public nuisance and violates the Michigan Environmental Protection Act, or MEPA, very important state environmental law, due to the risk of a release of oil into the waters of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. So that's the lawsuit that we filed in 2019, which at that time, Enbridge was perfectly happy to litigate in state court. We had more than a year of active litigation there. In fact, both sides, Enbridge and the Attorney General, through my co-counsel, Bob Reichel, and I, filed motions for summary disposition. In other words, those are, in the federal system, they're sometimes called motion for summary judgment. In Michigan state law, they're called motion for summary disposition. We asked the state court judge to decide the case without even having a trial. Just look at the complaint and decide it now, because you can look at the easement and see that those necessary findings that are required under the public trust doctrine were not made. So we should win right now. Interestingly enough, Enbridge filed their own motion for summary disposition. So they filed a case saying this is all or a motion arguing this is all preempted by federal law. These state law claims have to be dismissed. In other words, Enbridge expressly asked the state court judge to decide the case without going ahead to a trial, right? This dragged on for quite a while. We litigated those for over a year. The motions were filed. There were briefs filed. We had an argument in front of the state court judge. The judge asked for supplemental briefs on certain issues. And that litigation went on through the summer of 2020. But in the summer of 2020, something changed Enbridge's mind. And that was, so Sean was talking about the 2018 anchor strike on Line 5, which I actually sued the tugboat company, by the way, that owned the tug and barge that dropped its anchor. But in May of 2020, I believe, it might have been June, I believe it was May, we discovered evidence of new, less impactful, but new strikes on Line 5. And we thought that was concerning enough. Once again, just like in 2018, Enbridge's sort of vaunted early detection systems completely failed. To this day, no one knows exactly what it was in 2020 that hit the pipeline, or even exactly when it occurred. Okay, they just found evidence of impacts. One of the anchor supports was sort of ripped out and knocked over. There was an abrasion on one leg of the pipeline. And so we found that sufficiently concerning to file motions for a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction. In other words, everybody here's probably heard of a temporary restraining order, right? You can get those in any context. This was an order saying, state court judge, please order that the pipeline be shut down right now, immediately, until testing can be done to make sure that it's safe to resume operations. Because Enbridge had shut down the pipeline for about a day and then reactivated it without even communicating to the state that that was what they were going to do. And so the state court judge granted a temporary restraining order and shut the pipelines down temporarily. Both legs of the pipeline were shut down for a relatively short period of time, but then the leg that had suffered the impact was shut down for considerably longer, much of the summer of 2020. And this is just my guess, but I believe that's what changed Enbridge's mind. Suddenly, after they received that adverse ruling from the state court, they wanted out. They wanted to go to federal court if they could, right? And so it wasn't until the fall of 2020 that the governor and the DNR director issued their notice of revocation and termination of the 1953 easement. They had done some additional investigating, decided that Enbridge had breached the terms of the easement, and they said, we're revoking this easement. And they sued to enforce that. Enbridge, it's called, exercised their right of removal. They transferred that case to federal court, okay? The federal rules, the federal statute that governs removing cases like that say you have to do that within 30 days of when the case is filed. Enbridge had not removed the Attorney General's case, filed over a year prior, but they did remove the governor's case, and they filed their own lawsuit against the governor. So in doing so, Enbridge created what, in legalese terms we often refer to as a forum battle, right? We have very similar legal issues being considered simultaneously between two different courts, a state court, a federal court. The governor asked the federal judge to remand, meaning send her case back to state court, and the federal judge decided to keep it in federal court. And so the governor exercised her right to voluntarily just withdraw the complaint, drop the case and say, okay, the Attorney General's case can go forward. I don't want there to be this forum battle. By that point, it had been more than 2 years since we had filed the Attorney General's case against Enbridge. The motions for summary disposition had been pending decision for quite some time. And Enbridge's deadline to remove the case to federal court had expired nearly 2.5 years prior, but they removed the Attorney General's case to federal court. Really, really late. And so, in other words, it was, in my opinion, very clear that Enbridge wanted out of state court any way they could. So they removed the case. The Attorney General moves, once again, like the governor did, to remand the case back to state court and said, you can't do this. The deadline to remove expired 2.5 years ago almost. And there's very clear case law from the federal courts that says one of the main reasons you have this removal deadline is so that a defendant is not allowed to litigate in state court for a while, see how it goes, decide they don't like it, and then jump and start everything over again in a new court that they hope will be friendlier to them. And yet that's what Enbridge did here. The federal court, once again, in a decision that we respectfully disagreed with, opted to keep the Attorney General's case in the federal district court. And so what the Attorney General did, and I know my time's almost up, I'm going to wind this up here. I'm just getting to where the case is now. The long story short, in federal court, you typically don't get to do what's called an interlocutory appeal, which is an appeal while the case is still being litigated. Usually you have to fight the case all the way to the end and then appeal at the end. And we essentially had to file extensive requests to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals to say, in this rare situation, you should take this case now. You first have to ask the federal trial court judge to rule that they recommend that the Sixth Circuit take the case, which the judge in our case, to her immense credit, actually did, granted our request. And then you're allowed to ask the Sixth Circuit to let you appeal. And they let us appeal. And so that's quite unusual to go through those steps and have them be granted. And we got the appeal to the Sixth Circuit. We argued it last month, as Sean and Ashley were mentioning earlier, and we are awaiting our decision. And so the request there is whether the case will be remanded back to state court, which is what the Attorney General is asking for, or whether it will remain in the federal trial court. The sincere hope is we go back to state court, where the judge has had motions undecided pending in front of him to decide the case since 2020. And so our hope is just to get those heard and get those decided. And with that, thank you. I'll pass it over to Brian.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was incredible. And just a couple quick reminders. I know we've had some questions on the live stream. This is being recorded. So yes. And for those of you who are here in person, if you'd like a seat, we still have a couple more seats in here if you don't want to stand. We're all friendly, so we can make room if you'd like a seat. And finally, just welcome to Holly. Again, thank you so much for stepping in with Frank's medical emergency. We are so grateful to have you here. And with that, I'll kick it over to Brian.
Thank you. I do have some slides, but I don't have a little pointer. So you gave it great introduction. You can go on to the next slide. I've been working on tunnels for 5 decades now. So I started in the late 80s, over 80 miles of tunnel, over 35 years. Early on, one of these tunnels actually had a methane explosion and killed 3 of the workers. So I became an expert pretty quick on methane because I was in these tunnels every day and having to understand the risk and monitor for the gas. And I also spent a lot of time controlling the groundwater into the tunnels, and that's going to be a big problem at this site. So I'm your tunnel guy, technical guy here tonight. I spent, go on to the next one, and even the next one. Why I'm here is because I was hired as an expert witness in the MPCA case. This is what I was asked to respond to. I provided 4 hours of testimony. I have over 500 hours studying the plans and the designs and dealing with this. So I can't possibly condense it into 10 minutes, but I will try. So they wanted to know if there was a fire and explosion, would that be bad? The answer is yes. Okay. Okay. Second question. If there's a fire or explosion, will the tunnel contain the oil from the pipeline? The answer is no. Okay. So I spent 4 hours trying to convince them. I was disappointed at the commission, but I'll tell you why, and we'll explain what happened. But that's why I'm here. So next slide. Tunneling beneath open water. People have been trying it for hundreds of years. It is the most complicated, most challenging, difficult thing we can do on Earth, okay? So it may sound simple, but it is not, okay? And there is no other project on the planet where they've done something like this, okay? You don't put oil in pipelines in tunnels for a lot of reasons. Tunnels are a confined space. And you're in a confined space, if you have something that's flammable or can explode, usually sometime eventually you're going to have a spark and it's going to end badly. So that's why people don't do it. They're trying to do it here. There's a book here that Enbridge actually hired the company that wrote that book. But in my previous comments, you'll see they don't appear to have read the book because they haven't followed any of the recommendations that they should have to design this thing properly. Next slide. So Scott touched on this briefly. There was a report commissioned by the state of Michigan when they were looking at the alternatives to the Line 5 current pipelines. And the preferred alternative was to put it in a tunnel. But that came with conditions. And those conditions were there had to be adequate pre-designed studies because there was almost no data out there. They were using borings from the Mackinac Bridge project from the 50s, and they had like 6 borings out there in the lake. So they said, you have to do proper studies. They said there had to be solid, competent bedrock. Enbridge doesn't even know if there's bedrock all the way through the pathway because in the middle of the straits, there is a buried bedrock valley. It's like a canyon. and they couldn't even hit bedrock in one of the borings that they installed. And Scott mentioned the borings were roughly every 1,000 feet. They should be every 50 to 100 feet for this type of rock, so they're not even close to what they should be. Another key condition was low groundwater pressure. Well, guess what? The groundwater pressure here is roughly 17 atmospheres. Nobody has tunneled to that pressure in the United States ever, okay? So there will be groundwater pressure. It's going to be a problem the whole way through the tunnel. The other thing is methane. Methane and toxic gases. They said they don't anticipate it and they shouldn't be there. Well, Enbridge found it. They tried to downplay it. They tried to ignore it. They tried to deny it. It's in their own report. You can look it up. They put 3,000 pages together, but they are avoiding the methane totally. And the most important part, and which Sean touched on, was the design of the tunnel was supposed to be completely backfilled with concrete. After they finished the tunnel, they put the pipeline in, and all that airspace was supposed to be filled with concrete, because that will help support the tunnel. It'll prevent floods and fires and explosions and all the bad things that can happen. But they ignored that, and nobody at the state appears to understand this. I've been telling everybody. Maybe the Corps of Engineers will listen, but this is a real problem for this tunnel. And the only thing I can think of is Enbridge is trying to sell to the state of Michigan, who will own and operate the tunnel after Enbridge builds it, is that you could put in other utilities in there and make money. Now, this reminds me of something that happened in Flint where somebody tried to save a few bucks, and that didn't end well either, okay? So that's the only technical reason I can see of why they wouldn't backfill this tunnel, and it'll cost millions of dollars to pump it full of concrete because it's 4 miles long. So they're trying to save money. They've got the state, I believe, sold that they can sell this to somebody in the future. Well, if I was going to run a power line through an oil tunnel, I don't think I would do it. The risk would be too high. So I don't think there's ever going to be any other utilities in this tunnel, but that's apparently what they're trying to do. So the bottom line is the Enbridge design fails to meet all these critical criteria. So why are we still talking about it? They've done a great job of marketing in public relations. I congratulate them on that. So let's talk about Enbridge and their tunnel vision. They have almost no tunnel experience. They have 90,000 miles of pipeline and less than 1 mile in a tunnel. So that should tell you something. Okay. They have a project manager who you might think would be an engineer or a scientist or a construction manager. Well, she's a PR specialist. Okay. The lead engineer for Enbridge for the project he is an engineer. He has no previous tunnel experience. The company has no real tunnel experience. They are pipe layers. Okay. You can lay a pipe if you have a backhoe and a pipe wrench. You cannot do that with a tunnel. You need specialized equipment, specialized experience, and you have to know what you're doing. They don't know what they're doing, and they don't know that they don't know what they're doing, and they don't listen to people who do know what they're doing. And that combination of ignorance and arrogance is really dangerous. So, yeah, I'm a tunnel engineer. I don't have anything against tunnels, but you got to do it right, okay? And they don't know what they're doing. So, next slide, please. So, these are at a very high level are the issues and concerns I have regarding safety and engineering. They didn't do enough studies. We talked about that. They found a lot of hazards. The rock is the worst I've seen in my career. It is not solid rock. It's more like gravel. They have a way to rate the rock from 0 to 100. 25% of the rock came back as a 0. About another quarter of it came back less than 25. So more than half the rock is poor to very poor. This is not good to put a tunnel through, okay, from that perspective. And then we found the methane, but they have no idea how much methane is there or where it is, and they're never going to know until they run into it, and then it could be too late. They have an inadequate gas detection system. They have an inadequate ventilation system. Those are key to preventing explosions and keeping your workers safe. They have no real firefighting or fire suppression system. Their solution is close the doors at both ends and wait for the fire to burn itself out. That is literally their plan. Okay. We know better. There are better ways. There have been dozens of tunnel fires over the last 30 years. The state of the art is you have a system that'll bring in either water or foam and suppress it like you would in any public building. So the fact that they don't have that is just outrageous. They will have to send people out to repair the tunnel boring machine. And these pressures are so high. They're 3 times higher than the pressure that would take to kill a human. So every time they have to repair or maintain something, they're going to have to send out a diver, literally putting their life at risk to fix these things. It's called hyperbaric interventions, and there will be some, and it is very likely that someone could get hurt or die doing that. We talked about the open annulus design. That's the biggest hazard. Having that big open space with all that pressure, everything wants to get into that tunnel. And guess what? That groundwater has methane in it. You've got the rock and the soil above it. It's open to all sorts of risk. Enbridge actually identified 35 failure modes for the tunnel. And guess what? They dismissed all of them. Nothing to see here. Don't worry about it. I went up against some of their experts who testified about the fires and the explosions, and they were modeling like pinhole leaks. And they're saying, well, we could have this little leak and there would be a little fire and a little explosion, but there's no problem. And I said, you have to look at a worst case scenario. The full 30-inch pipeline bursts. Then how much oil do you have? It's going through there at 50,000 gallons a minute. Okay, Enbridge thinks they could shut it off within 3 minutes. We know what happened in line 6B. I'd be surprised if they could cut off the flow before there was 1 million gallons out, if there was a full bore release. And it's coming out at 500 PSI, maybe 1,000 PSI. So it's a massive amount. It's bigger. Most of the tunnel fires that happen because a truck has a couple hundred gallons of gasoline it burns. And that is enough to cause a collapse. Can you imagine how much would happen if there was 1 million gallons of oil that was on fire? So these are real concerns. They have to be taken seriously. The state has hired a couple consultants. They're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. In my mind, they're not asking the tough questions. They're sort of passing the buck because, in my opinion, they stand to earn hundreds of thousands of dollars more if the tunnel gets built and they keep billing their time. I'm a consultant. That's how I charge by the hour. But I will also tell my clients things that they don't want to hear. And they have an obligation. And they've raised some of the concerns, but for the most part, they've been passing the buck. So Enbridge is convinced this is safe. They're dead set on building the thing. What could possibly go wrong? I don't know about you, but I hear these Enbridge commercials all the time on the radio. What can go wrong? Well, let's go to the next slide because there's some history here. Next one. We have a water tunnel that went 6 miles out into Port Huron. It's still there. It supplies a lot of the water for the southeast Michigan. But just weeks before it was completed, there was a methane explosion. Somebody dropped a steel drill bit down the hole. It caused a spark, and there was a methane pocket. It killed 22 people, most of them instantly. I think there was one survivor who died later in the hospital. You're looking at the middle picture there. That's a cofferdam, and that was way out 6 miles. That's the damage that was done to the surface. You can imagine what happened inside. Nobody who was down there survived. And this came about because there was some shale beneath the limestone that tunnel went through. Okay, that's shale gas. And now we all know about people are pulling that gas out for fracking. Well, the Antrim shale was beneath the tunnel formation, and that gas is lighter than air. It moved its way up and it accumulated in the confined space, which is the tunnel, and you hear the spark. And with methane, it's either good or bad. There's no in between. You can't check it, and you have to be very careful about this, or something like this can happen. So, this was 50 years ago. The technology's changed. It's evolved. We know better. But Enbridge is not taking advantage of that. They are dismissing this like it's not a problem. Next slide, please. So this is something I brought up in my testimony. Michigan is an oil and gas producing state. There's a lot of it around here, and we do it safely. But the USGS identified this Collingwood Shale. It's a deeper formation. It got a lot of press a few years ago, and there's a bit of a land rush. I mean, in Kalkaska and some other places, you may have heard about this. So people are drilling deeper now to get this shale gas. Well, guess where this formation is thickest? You see that red spot at the top of the map there? Pretty close to the straits, right? That has gas. That has methane that could migrate up through fractures, work its way into the tunnel. And there was a professor that I was testifying against. We were going back and forth, and he's a Michigan Tech professor, and I'm a Michigan Tech grad, and he was arguing that this was nothing. Well, the USGS is saying there's 7 trillion cubic feet of gas under here. Okay, there's something there. And he came back with a paper that said, well, we took all these samples in Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. We didn't find any methane in the water. And I go, that's great. That doesn't tell you anything about the methane that they're going to encounter when they drill through this thing, okay? So that's the kind of arguments they're coming back with. Nothing scientific, nothing really defensible, but they're hiring experts and they're making their case, and it's really shoddy. It's really poor science. And, as a professional, I am really taken aback with some of the things that I've seen so far. But I'm wrapping it up. The last slide, please. So the bottom line is this has happened before. It's relatively rare, but we know this can happen. So you can make the proper planning, do the studies, get a design that at least keep your workers safe. And if they insist on keeping that tunnel open, you've got to do it in a safe way. So this picture at the top is in the Mont Blanc tunnel. That's in the Alps between France and Italy is where it came out. You can kind of see the wreckage of a truck that burned. 39 people were killed in this fire. This changed the whole industry. This is what put safety at a forefront. This is why every tunnel since then puts in these fire suppression and protection systems and makes the changes that Enbridge has refused to incorporate into their tunnel. Their tunnel design is in the bottom. It's basically an open circle, and the little yellow circle is the oil pipeline. It's only 30 inches diameter. You've got a 20-foot tunnel, so it's fairly small. And I made some little scribbles there. So what can happen, just to recap, is the tunnel can leak, okay? The pipelines do leak. So the product is gonna go down to the bottom of the tunnel. It gives off vapors. Those are the little green squiggly lines. The vapors are what can ignite and explode. The explosion could ignite the fire of the big pool of oil that is lying at the bottom of the tunnel. You get a big enough fire, you're going to end up something like in that top photo where you actually have a hole in the liner. But that tunnel was through a mountain through solid rock. This tunnel would be through crappy rock, which will be pushed in with all the groundwater. It will destroy the pipeline if it isn't already destroyed. And once that happens, the tunnel will collapse. It'll lose the secondary containment, and all the oil and the natural gas liquids that are flowing through there will percolate their way upwards because they're lighter than water. And It's going to happen at a deeper elevation, but if there's 1 million gallons, you're going to see it. It's going to work its way up through the lake bed. It's going to go to the surface. And I think some of you have seen the models. It'll go from Chicago to Detroit. It's going to go everywhere. And it's just simply too risky to let a company that has such a track record to do a project like this. This is not for amateurs, rookies, greenhorns. They've never done this. Nobody in the US has done this, and they're not going about it the right way. So that's, well, absolutely. Okay.
Thank you so much, Brian. This is probably now a good time to also invite you all to have a beer after this. We're hoping to have folks continue the conversation at Silver Spruce. So if you're driven to drink by any of this, or just get a snack, that's where we're headed. And Denise, we'd love to hear from you too.
Well, thanks everybody. Boy, I thought my talk was going to be scary about climate change. It's interesting to follow you, my fine friend. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to Groundwork for hosting this a wonderful event. I'm very grateful to be here and speak with you all tonight. I know that the main concern and the piece that we've all talked about is the oil spill. And of course, we're concerned about that. And it's if and not when. And I'm from Kalamazoo. We lived through this, and it's not cleaned up yet. So we know what that feels like and what that looks like and what happens. But I'm here to talk about climate change and the burning of the oil and fossil fuels that already causes a carbon spill every single day and has since 1953. It's continuing right now. And that carbon is going to last another 100 years in our atmosphere. So the real danger of this, in my mind, and for the Michigan Climate Action Network, and I hope for all of you, is that this is not safe because greenhouse gases are not safe, and we are in a climate emergency. The Enbridge Line 5 pipeline transports 23 million gallons of oil every day. That's 57 million metric tons a year. And we're to blame because one 3,000-mile flight is 1 ton, right? We need to be thinking about who is actually responsible. The pipeline actually spans the history of the Great Acceleration, as it's known, of climate impacts since World War II. When it was built, how it has moved through this time. Those are the emissions, and it's the poster child, frankly, of why we find ourselves in this situation. I'm going to take a minute to talk about some of the climate pieces because I feel like the headlines out there of these words of historic and unprecedented and record-breaking, it almost starts to lose meaning for us. So I want to remind you of the urgency of this crisis and, of course, some of the things that we're going to be able to do. We are burning more fossil fuels than ever, folks, despite decades of warnings from scientists and pledges from countries and leaders all over the world. We're still burning more fossil fuels. So guess what? Atmospheric concentrations of the 3 major greenhouse gases also continue to rise. And since everybody here listens to science, guess what that means? Temperature continues to go up. I'm sure the headlines didn't escape you from 2023, the hottest year on record. And by the way, by record, we mean in the last 100,000 years. Prior to human civilization, folks, we are running an experiment here that we have never seen before and that we don't know what will happen. I don't really have a word to describe that, whether that's historic or, yeah, we're gonna need that beer. All right. The consequences of all of this additional heat are also already playing out. We saw the Canadian wildfire, worst season ever. Antarctic ice is at the lowest ever. And right here in Michigan, we've experienced rainfall, catastrophic dam failures, unseasonable temperatures that maybe were kind of nice this winter, but will not be this summer by the time we are in record heat waves. And folks have no place to go to get out of that, disproportionately affecting BIPOC communities and low-income communities. And we experienced, of course, the winter that was not, right? And our culture is changing. All of the dog sled races were canceled this year. There's only 16% of the Great Lakes covered in ice this year. Normally that would be at 57%. A whole way of life, folks, is what we are losing. All right, the good news. Okay. The good news is we know what to do and we know how to do it, right? Justice and science both demand that we cut carbon emissions in half this decade. It's already 2024, folks. That means by 2030. We got 6 years to cut this stuff in half. Oil tunnels don't fit into that. And I will remind you that every single fraction of a degree matters. One of the big things that spurred my career on this was a 2018 report of what's really the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. Turns out a lot. And every little fraction there is, oh, the survival of coral reefs, the stoppage of suffering of half of the people in this world. It matters, every little bit that we can do. We just saw another report last week or so that confirmed that all of these emissions are really only from 78 different corporate and state entities. 78 are historically responsible for 70% of the emissions. That's a small number, right? Boy, they must have a lot of power. That's what we're hearing here tonight, right? Surely we could control 78 corporate and state entities, but apparently we cannot. That is in large part due to the opposition of the fossil fuel industry. Decades of misinformation, the undermining of scientific evidence of climate change has delayed that policy action. The fossil fuels anti-democratic strategy is clear, folks. Use the levers of power to obstruct any climate policies that may reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And I think you've heard the answer why. It makes them a lot of money. So what's the Michigan Climate Action Network to do, right? We've got some big challenges in front of us. It requires us to focus on political mobilization to break that power of the fossil fuel industry on our politics and bend the arc of history back to justice. The majority of Michiganders are with us, folks. I know it sometimes doesn't feel like that when you're out there. Over 70% of Michiganders believe in climate change, 66% are concerned, and over 70% support renewable energy. This is again thwarting the public will. People want this change. It is being stopped by an industry that is making a lot of money. We're a network structure, and I really enjoy that piece of it because it allows us to uplift a variety of strategies and tactics from a lot of different groups, because I'm here to tell you we need every single one of them. We need grassroots mobilization. We need effective advocacy on our decision makers. We need experts holding agency decision making accountable. And we need this legal piece, right? The things that Dan was talking about is one of the other things that Michigan Climate Action Network does. The courts are a very, very important piece of this because it's another chance to also change the rules of the game, to say what is matters to us and to uphold that in a court of law, to demand, frankly, that the regulatory system take climate into account. So in addition to all that grassroots work that we do and public elected official pressure with Oil and Water Don't Mix and Groundwork and so many partners on this issue, and before my time even with MyCan, we decided to have our own day in court and to challenge Enbridge, challenge the Michigan Public Service Commission, and frankly, challenge the law itself to recognize what we already know, that we are living in this climate crisis. I'm going to take a chance here to thank, I hope they're watching on the live stream, our lawyers at Environmental Law and Policy Center. We could not do this without them. The planet needs good lawyers. Thank you, Dan, for that. And thank you, Environmental Law and Policy Center, another not-for-profit, represents us in these cases and is our co-plaintiff. And what I want to talk to you a little bit about is some of the history of our intervention with the Michigan Public Service Commission on their permitting process for this tunnel. And I'll only be able to tell you a little bit about the history up till now, because our appeal actually will be filed on May 9th, and I can't disclose exactly what's in there yet. So I'm going to walk us through the history of where we've been, and then we'll be waiting for that decision very soon. So together, Environmental Law and Policy Center and MyCan, back in 2020, filed a petition to intervene in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission in opposition to Enbridge's application to permit the tunnel. We did this because, again, we were concerned about those climate impacts in Michigan and the world if our state allows an oil tunnel to be built. Do we really want to be the last state to build an oil tunnel? I don't think so. The Michigan Public Service Commission has to determine if a project like this serves the public interest and whether there are environmental impacts. Specifically, as Dan mentioned, under the Michigan Environmental Protection Act, it requires us to look at whether it will harm the air, the water, or other natural resources, or the public trust in those resources. We intervened in this decision to argue that greenhouse gas emissions that contribute to climate change clearly fall into this category, and to request the Michigan Public Service Commission to thoroughly consider climate impacts as part of their decision and to give Enbridge that permit. So 1 year later, it takes a while, it takes a long time, right? As been mentioned. In April of 2021, the Michigan Public Service Commission, after some other battles, agreed with that. Amazingly said, we should be including climate in our Michigan Environmental Protection Act analysis of these impacts. This was huge. This was the first time that a Michigan agency actually considered climate under MEPA in the state. Huge win, right? Changing that game, right? That's what the law can do for us. Then we had to provide the evidence, right? Thankfully, there are guys like Brian out there to do these pieces. And I'll just give you a little bit of the evidence that we supplied in September of 2021. These experts said, first, building an oil tunnel will exacerbate the climate crisis. Go figure, right? And it adds an additional, as Ashley noted in her opening remarks, additional 27 million metric tons every year. That's the equivalent of almost 7 coal-fired power plants or 6 million new ICE vehicles on the road, folks. That's what we're looking at as far as impacts. Those experts also found that the proposed oil tunnel will result in climate impacts that would cause tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in damages from climate change. The average is about $1 billion a year. They also found, the experts let us know, that shutting down Line 5 and not building an oil tunnel is a viable option. We have options. We have seen our own legislature, the federal government, Inflation Reduction Act investments to spur renewable energy growth. Our own legislature, which many of the people in this room worked on with us, to pass a 60% renewable energy standard. Folks are taking this action. We are moving towards those renewables, and we can meet our energy needs without oil. So where are we now? After all that evidence, we got all geared up last summer when Brian got to do all of his tunnel expert testimony. And then, of course, in December of 2023, the Michigan Public Service Commission entered their final order approving this project. And we've appealed again. And again, I can't say much about what's in that actual appeal. It'll go live in a couple weeks, and we'll be able to share all of those arguments with you. And I just want to close with kind of a general comment and maybe some things that all of us can do and how we can think about continuing to engage in this. Our position is that instead of spending billions to construct an oil tunnel that will result in billions of dollars of damage and untold human suffering, the most viable and sensible course of action is to shut down Line 5 and focus on cleaner, better energy alternatives. We can do better than replacing existing Line 5 with an expensive, dangerous, new fossil fuel infrastructure. We're already moving towards those renewables. And to do that, we have to embrace that variety of tactics and strategies. We need that pressure on the elected officials. We need these court cases. And I think that everyone out here, thank you if you've taken one of those actions. And if you haven't yet signed that petition or contacted your congressperson or the governor or Biden and all of them, then please do so, right? Oil and water don't mix, and our organizations try to make it really, really easy for you to take these actions. That's our mission. We truly hope you'll take those actions when we ask, because we need your support, and those decision makers need to hear from you. It does make a difference. So with your help, I hope that we will all continue and we will be successful and we will shut down America's most dangerous pipeline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Denise. And now we're going to hear from yet another attorney, Holly Bird, who actually was one of the lead attorneys representing tribal interests in the Standing Rock case. So Holly, with that, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Ojawasko Wasimosakwe, Nimkian Dodum, Indandao. I'm Holly Bird. I am Thunder Clan, and I am descended from the Parepacha, Yaqui, and Apache people of the Southwest. Interestingly, we're related to the Anishinaabe. So I'm here in place, and I guess I was recommended by Frank Edowagishik. And even though I've done this work for a long time, since I was in high school, practically when I first started canvassing for Perjum and Andy Bucksbaum, it's always an honor because Frank is a very respected elder in our community. And so my prayers go to him today. I'm here to talk about sovereignty and tribal sovereignty and what these cases mean. And I'll add a little more to that because I think that there's a little more of a voice. I'm kind of the Lorax here, being probably one of the only Indigenous people in the room. So there's a few other points I'd like to make as well. So talking about sovereignty is our very first concept. That means that you have the right to make decisions about what it is that you are or that you own. So we as people, hopefully as free people, we have sovereignty over our bodies, right? I believe Ashley has sovereignty over that microphone right now. And as tribes, that means we have the ability and the right, the given right to govern ourselves. That is not a right that's given by anyone else but us, by what we say is creator. Just as it would be for any other form of government. The US probably claims the same thing, right? We're here because we were meant to be here and we have the right to govern ourselves. So that's just a real basic idea of what sovereignty is. I do want to say that tribal sovereignty is not an idea that's given to us by the US. We actually have been here for thousands and thousands of years and had our own sovereignty. I always say if you look at US history, tribal history goes to here, and U.S. history is the tip of my pinky. So that's how long our sovereignty has been here. So that's one way for us to start looking at this from. The other viewpoint, though, is how do you understand our sovereignty? How does the U.S., the government of the U.S., understand our sovereignty? And the way that has worked is by law, by treaty, primarily. We know it wasn't a great beginning. Manifest Destiny didn't have a very good viewpoint for us here. But what that meant for us was we governed each other and dealt with each other through treaties. Now, for those who haven't taken Law 101 or maybe missed this part in civics class, treaties are the law of the land. They're the law that affects everybody. And it's what puts boundaries in place between us and other sovereign nations. So we know, for example, treaties define the shape of the United States and who is part of the United States and who isn't. Same with Canada, same with other sovereign nations, including tribes. And in this country, we have many, many tribes, hundreds, as many tribes as there are, or as many treaties as there are tribes, practically. And then some treaties actually affect multiple tribes. In this case, when we're talking about Enbridge, and I always do like to qualify that treaties are everybody's law, right? Everybody here should know their treaties that they live under because they're your law too. But in this area, and as it affects this case with Enbridge, we have some very specific treaties that are being brought up. For the tribes here in Michigan, we have 12 tribes. But in this particular case, we're looking at the Treaty of Washington, which was created back in the 1800s. And underneath that, we have the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority, which governs the rights of the tribes that are affected by the Treaty of Washington. And these are primarily the tribes that are around the upper part of Michigan and the lakes. It governs our right to fish. It governs our right to exist in our own cultural ways and have our livelihoods with the water, with the fish. with the inland waterways, with the flora and the fauna. So it's all of these things that are self-contained within these treaties. With Wisconsin and Bad River, which is another part of this case, they also have a treaty, the 1854 treaty, that governs the same sort of thing. It doesn't have the same language and it doesn't have the same Cora authority that we have here, because all treaties are different, but it's something that they do rely on. And then the other treaty that we often have been heard being talked about is the Transit Treaty, which is between the United States and Canada. So getting into what all of that means here and how it interplays with these cases, I'm going to start first with the Line 5 case, which was so aptly explained by counsel here, how that works, the way that it interplays with tribal sovereignty is that Enbridge has already violated our treaties as far as putting the pipeline in. One of the number one tenets that we understand when you cross or abrogate any kind of right that a tribe may have, but before you do it, you're supposed to have a consultation with that tribe, the tribes that are affected. And that's really on the US government to do that. That was not done when the original pipeline was put through. In fact, my husband, who was the tribal counselor for Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, was at the very first consultation between Enbridge and tribes concerning the pipeline. And this is them coming to say, hey, we want to do a tunnel. Yay, this is fun, right? And that was really interesting and telling, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But that only happened about 6 years ago. So we know, and they know, and for a long time, that they've been part of the violation of that treaty. The how it affects Line 5 here and the cases here is we know that through the livelihood of the tribes here, which is subsistence fishing, right? Fishing is a huge way of life here. The waters are a huge way of life. Everything from creation stories, where we came from, to food, not just fishing, but manuman, the rice, to culture, spirit, everything. We have ceremonies around it. We have entire ways of life surrounding the water. And the any encroachment on that is a violation of the treaty. So we know that that's happened a lot. We know that that's happened not just by Enbridge, but by the state, by the federal government. But this would be a particularly egregious, and the tribes have spoken out against it unanimously. I think there's only one tribe in Michigan that is iffy on it, but all of them have spoken out against it and have filed against it. The in Bad River, when we talk about that one, that's come up as well, where they have a pipeline running through the Bad River Reservation. The easement for that also expired. I believe it was in 2013. And they also are at danger of rupture. In fact, there's a piece of the pipeline, and some of you have seen a recent movie on this, where they're only like 11 feet between the pipeline and this corroding riverbed, where that pipeline's exposed and can actually become damaged. It's very tenuous. And that whole area where they are, it's their rivershed, it's their watershed. It would be a disastrous situation. So what they did was they actually took a really brave action, and this was during we had the Line 5 litigation started with Michigan, and then Bad River chose not to renew the easement, and they made a very vocal, like, hey, you guys got to leave, and it was very brave because they're a small tribe. They don't have a lot of money. And it was probably one of the first times that we had tribes going, out, buddy, you're done. And of course, Enbridge ignored it. They, in fact, they just kept going, and it would come and sue us. So that's been the whole thing. And in that case, it was found that they were trespassing because they no longer had a right to be there. However, the judge in that case decided that they could stay till 2026, another 3 years. So go ahead and trespass for another 3 years. It's It's okay that there's a huge risk of rupture, and which is, an egregious decision. It's nice that they did find that there was a trespass. It's nice that they told them that they had to remove it, but Enbridge has no plans to do that. They really don't. They think they can keep pushing that. And in fact, through their arguments in this case, they've tried to say that they're right under the transit treaty to have a pipeline going through these lands, whether it be state, federal, or tribal, um, overrides everybody else's rights. That's what they keep arguing, is that their pipeline is more important because of the apparent risk to the public if it should be removed. And mind you, and we've already heard this, that there is no real risk to the public if it is removed. There are other options that are viable options. And I think we had determined for Michigan it was like 1 or 2 cents per gallon or something more in price, which I would gladly pay. I'd pay $1 more, honestly, to prevent my lakes from rupture. Thank you. But this argument, and unfortunately, the U.S. has been really quiet about this until recently. This argument's a really dangerous argument, and whether it happens to tribes, and we know that tribes in their trust relationship with the government, with the U.S. government, the U.S. government is supposed to be protecting us, right? We're supposed to be protected from other countries and other corporate entities. There is no federal law right now that allows them to do something different than that. And in fact, it would violate umpteen federal laws if the US government does not protect tribes from Enbridge. I think this has become even more not, like, out there for people because it might affect states and other people besides tribes. This stuff has been happening to us for a long time. Right? Let's talk about that for just a second. And because we talked about going out and having a drink, we talked about a climate emergency, but folks, my people have been dying for a long time. Right? We can talk about, we can go back to the Osage murders, right? Some of you just saw that movie, Killers of the Flower Moon. That was some of the first murders for oil. And that was just flat out murder. We can talk about the Texaco Chevron oil spill in the 70s that happened around Ecuador and the Amazon. 4 tribes went extinct. 4 tribes went extinct. Think about that. And tribes aren't little. They're not, just small family groups. They're thousands and thousands and thousands of people. This tribe here at Grand Traverse Band is a smaller tribe. It's got 4,500 members, give or take. It's a smaller tribe. Some have much more. So having 4 tribes go extinct is a lot. In 1989, the Exxon Valdez oil spill with the Altique, which is a tribe up there, completely demolished their way of life. They call that the day the water died, because it's never been the same. Thank you. And then in 2010, we had the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. We had Louisiana tribes, at least 5 of them, whose subsistence was shrimping, and they can no longer do that. And their health concerns coming out of that were worse than the oil workers. We know about Kalamazoo. We know about Standing Rock, where we had the same issue happening. And another offshoot of that most people aren't aware of are the man camps that come out of the oil camps. Berthold Reservation, which is out towards Montana, and the Dakotas, coming down from Bock and oil fields, they established the man camps there, and the uptick in crime was like 75%. And that was coming out disproportionately on Indigenous women and children. Deaths, murders, we still can't even count the number that have happened. And that's something that we risk here with the tunnel. So we did, though, going back to talk about those threats, and like I said, we're already dying. We've already been dying. And that's what we risk here as well. When we see our activists, we don't always have big money to hire lawyers. We put our bodies on the line. I've heard some people get upset with tribal people who will show up at things and lay their body down, but that's all they have. Does that make sense? Right. So here, though, when we talk about these treaties and sovereignty, this is dangerous. This is dangerous for all of us. We know that because water is precious. We know that because air is precious and our climate is precious. But in these cases, what Enbridge is asking the court to do is to completely ignore the rights of all of you. Not just us this time, but it's all of you and all of us. And, what my husband said to them one day with one of their people that tried to show him a pipeline that was a brand new pipeline, showing him how safe it would be in the tunnel. And he said, well, what's more precious, the oil running through that or what it's running through, the water? And they had to admit it was the water. But what they couldn't tell him was how they would clean it up if anything ever happened. And we know from Kalamazoo, right, they don't even have enough insurance to cover it. They don't even have enough insurance to cover any spill anywhere. They just don't. So the fight is an extraordinary fight. And I don't wish for anybody to die, in any place, much less my people continuing to experience that. But I'm thankful for everybody that's here today. My advice is to keep fighting, support our tribes in their fight, get that word out there, talk to your neighbors. Sometimes the informational campaigns, some of us, we do a lot of heady legal work. We can write briefs, we can go argue, but sometimes the work is done with the American public, and it's done with who you vote for. Right. So get out there. If you have great Uncle Joe that loves his gas automobile and just thinks that climate science is hokey, please go talk to him. You've got to have those uncomfortable conversations so my people don't keep dying. Right? So that your people don't start to die. So miigwech.
Thank you so much, Holly, for those powerful words. And you teed things up perfectly for our next slide, which is a call to action. This is just one of many things that you can do. But right now you can take out your phone, you can scan this QR code or go to that link at the bottom. This will send a message to Michigan State Senators, Senator Peters and Senator Stabenow, urging them to continue to put pressure on the Biden administration and revoke the presidential permit for Line 5. Continuing to put pressure on Biden and a number of our both state and federal actors is one of the most important things we can do. So we didn't want to throw 15 actions at you tonight. If you're eager to do more and inspired by our incredible panel here, please reach out to me. I have 100 things you can do. But I'm serious. Take out your phone if you can, and please take action right now. If you're tuned in online, snap it from your screen. But it's incredibly important to keep holding their feet to the fire, especially during a critical election year like this one. So thank you for being a part of this and doing that. Now, we are at the time that we said we'd be wrapping this all up, but I'm hoping we can go just a little bit over. If y'all need to head out for any reason, that's totally okay. But I do want to make sure we've got some time for audience questions if our panelists will oblige. And with that, Jeff is going to be floating around with a microphone, and we would love to invite some questions from the audience.
Mine isn't so much a question as it's an idea. You seem to be going about this all in a legal way, but you have some resources that you're overlooking. I don't know how many of you watch foreign TV, but there was a movie maker over in Norway that was vastly upset over the way earthquakes and earthquake warnings were doing. And he made a series of movies about earthquakes and tsunamis in Norway. You have a wonderful resource in the Native community through Irene Bedard and other production companies that make movies. You have movie makers out there that support them. You have experts that know what can happen. That could be the worst case scenario. Why aren't you putting together a movie so that people, the ordinary human people that don't listen to legal briefs and don't pay attention to news stories and don't get involved because they're too busy, but they do go to the movies and they like disaster movies, can see what can happen in their own backyard. That's a really good idea. And you'd be making money off it too. And you'd have money to fight Enbridge.
Do any of the panelists want to respond? Or I mean, there actually have been 2 films, if you aren't aware of them, in the last year that have come out on Line 5. An incredible story called Troubled Water, which featured 2 paddle boarders who paddle boarded from the Mackinac Straits to Lansing to convey their concern over the Line 5, existing Line 5 pipelines. And then the film Bad River, which if you have not seen it, it is an incredibly powerful and moving film about the fight that's going on in Wisconsin right now with that tribe. But I think certainly there's a lot more room in this story for that.
If you haven't watched the movie Earthquake and Tsunami by that Norwegian filmmaker, go watch them and see what I'm talking about, because I think there's room. And there's even a Norwegian film about a tunnel collapse.
Okay, thank you. It looks like Jeff's got another question.
Yep.
I think this is a question for our engineer, and I'm sorry, I don't have your name on. Brian, if it's so badly designed and the rock that's there is so unknown and they haven't done enough studies and sampling, is the tunnel just going to kind of collapse as they're building it? Is there a possibility that the tunnel can't actually even be built? I'm just wondering what the chances are that you think that it would even be structurally possible to build it. And maybe this is just like a pipe dream, to use a pun.
I predict it will not be built, even if they try. It is so difficult.
Can you use the microphone? Sorry, just so folks online can hear.
I wouldn't be surprised if the TBM is abandoned midway through it. Once you hit the bad rock, you can't just back it up. You know, it's $100 million machine, and they've left more expensive ones in the ground. So if the ground is bad enough, it's very likely that the project will not be completed because of that. So.
Thanks.
I'm going to talk really loud because I have to go and write the news story.
But I've got the
I
microphone.
apologize for barging in with the record eagle. The big news is
Boo.
this upcoming appeal on May 9th, correct? And you can't tell us anything at all about
So
the appeal?
we are filing our next appeal to the MPSC intervention on May 9th. And I can't reveal what's in that because it's not written yet, mostly. Hi, lawyers.
Can you give a high
I gave you,
level?
I can give you what we did historically, which was to intervene in that case and argue under the Michigan Environmental Protection Act that greenhouse gases are should be considered in those climate impacts. And that's what we won in 2021. And I stopped there. The lawyers understand why I need to stop there.
I lived in
But thank you.
in Battle Creek when the biggest inland oil spill in U.S. history took place.
right.
And I wasn't in journalism right then. And I had a lot of interaction with Enbridge people, and I brought the New York Times in at that time.
Yeah.
And I concluded after 3 years of working with them, or battling with them, that Enbridge business model is to use lawyers and PR groups to oppose anything ever
Yeah.
that might threaten their business.
Yeah.
I'm not supposed to say that as a reporter, but that was my observation. It seems to me right now that they're winning. Are they winning? I'd like to know from all of you. Are they winning using legal delays and PR right now? Are they winning?
Let's pass the mic so that.
Just one quick comment. So I'm also working on the EIS case, and I can't comment on it because I'm working under attorney-client privilege. So I wouldn't say they're winning. The battle isn't over. We're still fighting this, and we're going to make our case as best we can.
We're fighting against a rigged system. Right now, money in politics is a real issue. If I could change one thing in the environmental world in Michigan and the United States, one law, it would be getting rid of the awful Citizens United ruling and changing the system of money in politics that makes this rigged system happen. But the people are going to win. We're, they can throw lawyers and PR as much as they want. We're gonna win it.
Last question. The next crisis, if they shut down line 5 that nobody's talking about here, and I don't know why, is on the shores of Lake Huron is that gigantic radioactive storage unit on the Ontario side that has leaked, has given off radiation, and nobody's talking about it at all. And if it spills into Lake Huron, you would have 1,000 years of radioactive pollution. I don't know why you guys aren't bringing it up as well.
We also oppose nuclear, as does the tribes, and we will say on the record, if you want a good quote, the fossil fuel industry's anti-democratic status is manipulating the levers of power in order to stop any of these climate policies. That is the absolute what is happening. I'm let Holly Bird.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, we are talking about it. We're just not talking about it today because we were here to talk about line 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Record Eagle.
All right, and Jeff's got the mic in the back with a new person.
I have a comment and a question. First of all, thank you everyone for coming up here. I really appreciated the level of detail you brought. I consider myself a fairly involved person, but there's a lot that I've not been, up to speed on. So thank you for that. And I hope that as you leave today, going back to your role, either in the state of Michigan or nonprofit advocacy sector, that anytime you have the opportunity to come before the public with an issue of, I like how it was phrased, science and justice demands this, within that framework, that you really please make sure that there's another tribal citizen at the table with you, because I think informing all of these issues in the lens of sovereignty is so important. And we're really lucky where we live because we have Holly T. Bird and such an involved Grand Traverse band. But when you're in other parts of the state too, I just really hope that you make sure that you've got an equally inclusive and well thought out panel. So thank you for that. I think that was really great. I'm just a fan of Holly Bird. Yeah, my question is, I think, Mr. O'Meara, you did Brian, I'm sorry, you did such a nice job of conveying the risk to human life, let alone the environment. I think everybody understands the risks to the environment. And I know you're doing a great job advancing this in the courts, but as the gentleman from the Record Eagle alluded, there is kind of a PR or a public campaign here. I'm curious as to where labor stands on this, given that it seems to be such a risky endeavor that, that a union would never want to send. Where are they in this discussion?
Real quickly, I want to say something too, because I've been to these meetings in Lansing and I hear the union guys get up there, the laborers, the operators, and I'm one of the, I wasn't one of them, but I was going down the hole every day. And those guys they're counting on the engineers and the scientists that this is going to be safe. They're dying for these jobs, but they don't want to die for these jobs. Okay. So I think they've been misled. We've all been sold a bill of goods by Enbridge. So we got to educate these people. I respect that kind of work, but if you don't do it right, you're going to end up a statistic, and we've already had way too many of those as well. So.
Yeah, great question about labor. I just like to point out, labor is not a monolith. We have 3 very powerful unions in Michigan who support the Line 5 tunnel. They're LIUNA, the building trades, as well as the operating engineers. But by and large, labor hasn't taken a position. The Michigan AFL hasn't taken a position. The largest growing and most and winningest recently union from right here in Michigan, the United Auto Workers, hasn't taken a position as well. So it's important that, I think the labor movement is really a force for good in this country overall. And we have 3 unions who have taken a bad stance on this, but it surely doesn't represent the entire movement.
Great. Another question.
This is going to go a different direction. My first job out of high school was Mackinac Island, 9 summers, 2 winters. And that was life changing for me. And those straits mean everything. We're talking a lot about accidents. Any of these things that would happen would be some kind of an accident. Is there also talk about intentional sabotage of that pipeline? I have to believe, and I was never like this before, that somewhere this is on somebody's top 20 list of how do you want to screw up the United States? You hit their water supply, right? So you have a pipeline under the water that wouldn't be that hard. It happened in the Ukraine-Russian situation recently. Is that anything that's ever talked about?
I did raise it in my slide. I call it terrorism. So that's another reason why if you're going to build the tunnel, you got to fill the tunnel, because you can't walk down there and put a bomb on it. So it's come up. It hasn't been stressed a lot, but it's certainly a possibility. And that's one of the things that I raised in my testimony was, hey, you have to look at all potential failure modes, not just pinholes and other things. So yes, it's an issue.
I won't respond to that one directly, but I'll tell you what is intentional that we do know every single day, that they're contributing to climate change, right? I mean, that is an intentional mis and disinformation campaign and outright denial, and has misled the public, much of the public right along with them, to continue to say nothing to see here, nothing happening, when we know better, right? So that part is absolutely already intentional.
And it is intentional terrorism against my people.
Thank you for being here and offering your expertise. This is sort of a right-hand turn, but something that we can all do easily is call our beloved radio station, WIAA, which I was outraged to hear allowing Enbridge to give their spiel as a supporter of Interlochen Public Radio. Please call them 276 something or other. You've heard that number over and over again when they try to fundraise. Stop giving them your money until they stop taking Enbridge's money. Thank you.
I'm going to add to that because that is outrageous. And I called Peter Payette personally about it because it does not match their values for NPR and IPR that we know, for them to be carrying the message for Enbridge on their radio station.
Thank you. I know we've got a.
What did Payette say? He said, if you have some time sometime, I'd like to talk to you about why we made that decision. And I went back and said, I'm too disappointed to have you try to justify your decision. So we need more of you to reach out, send a message to IPR, send it very clearly. That does not match your values, not and our values. There's an ex-ag commission in this state, when you saw what we had to deal with in Kalamazoo's spill, and it was wildlife and degradation, it was land degradation. We now go through drills in the Department of Agriculture, bringing together 200 veterinarians at a time and putting them into hazmat suits to send them out and drilling, and how do we deal with the next oil spill and saving wildlife and saving domestic animals. So this is wrong, folks. You've got to get your message out. All of us have to get that message out.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we've got another question right here.
This is a question for Brian. Brian, you mentioned that there were 2 recommended ways to suppress a fire inside of a tunnel that was a result of an explosion. You said there was a suppression foam and there was water.
Right.
Is there any suppression foam that's not made with PFAS?
Most of it has PFAS.
Therein.
Yes.
is another
And
big
so
problem.
there are some alternatives, but water is not a way to put out an oil fire. So I'm not an expert on the alternatives, but yes, there are some alternatives to the PFAS foam systems. But the point is, their solution was literally close the door at each end and just wait until it burns itself out. And I had to tell them, I can't remember how many millions of cubic feet of air you have in that tunnel, even if it is sealed, and it could burn for days. So it's so ridiculous, the arguments that they're putting forth. It's just
Totally agree.
And then
Here.
Annie, Chimigwech, each of you, for being here, for your information, and for your hard work. I just want to say something. I had a preacher once when I was a kid. He said, you can argue with a fool all day, but there's really only one way to win that argument. Is hit them in their wallet. Those corporations that are controlling, let's watch how we spend our pennies. Hit them in their wallet. Let them know that we're paying attention. Water is life. We can live without shelter. We can live without clothing. We can go days without food. We cannot survive without water. Again,
Thank you.
Is there any danger of repercussions from construction to the footings of the Mackinac Bridge? Is that potential that something could carry over and impact it?
that is one failure mode that we didn't think of. So is it possible that it could impact an explosion in the tunnel, impact the Mackinac Bridge footings? Possibly, but I'd say that's probably pretty unlikely or remote.
Well, as the former chairman of the Mackinac Bridge Authority for 17 years, I wish you'd look at it. Thank you.
No, we'll definitely add that to the list.
Thanks.
Part of the agreement behind closed doors with Governor Snyder was that at the end of this process, if this was built, the responsibility for the tunnel would be on us taxpayers.
That's correct.
And that hasn't been stressed enough, because if
Right.
anything happens, it's our responsibility. Enbridge only leases it from the state of Michigan at that point.
That's correct.
Okay.
This is for Sean. Is there any way we can follow the money, like where the Enbridge donations to political campaigns?
So Enbridge is usually pretty good at hiding their money, and C4, like through using 501c4s, and this has been in, if anybody's following the news about the even more disgraced Speaker Chatfield, and that ongoing case, you can see how 501c4s can be used to conceal political donations. Now, I don't want to get into all the details of how they do that, but we have caught Enbridge making some very specific donations. The biggest one that we caught Enbridge red-handed because they screwed up and donated from something that had their name on it. They donated $135,000 in 2018, early 2018, to the Michigan Chamber of Commerce. And the next day, the Chamber of Commerce donated $135,000 to the legal team that was trying to keep redistricting reform off the ballot. So Enbridge directly funded something to try to stop the people from being able to ungerrymander the state. We caught them on that contribution. Now their lobbying expenses, which Michigan has some of the worst reporting laws in the country when it comes to lobbying expenditures and stuff like that. It's another great thing that Attorney General Nessel is working on, actually, is bringing more sunshine into that process. But we could watch, even just from the things that they had to report, Enbridge's spending really increased on lobbying between like 2013 when this started and between today. The other thing that we have been able to track, somebody brought up that how much Enbridge relies on PR. And so we have been able to track some of their spending on advertising. And so this is straight up advertising, not including things like when they buy out gas stations and fill up everybody's car with gas for free and tell them how the world's going to end if there's no Line 5. Even things like that are exorbitantly expensive are not included in this. But in 2021, we tracked $8.5 million that Enbridge spent on TV and radio and digital ads in Michigan alone. So 8.5 million, although that's pretty cheap compared to what they make on this pipeline every day.
That's just a couple days. All right, we're going to be able to take one more question and then unfortunately have to cut it off, but we'd love to continue the conversation, like I said, at Silver Spruce afterward if you're interested and able to go. Jeff, are there any additional? Okay,
I'll try to make it a good one.
All right.
I've got the microphone. So hi guys, that's Bill from the Oil and Water Don't Mix campaign. So Brian, you had mentioned that the project manager for the tunnel project is Amber Pasteur, the kindergarten teacher / PR person, and not really a tunnel engineer. So my question to Dan is, Dan, so when Enbridge made the deal with Michigan to build their tunnel, when the law basically says we allow Enbridge to build a tunnel, but it's not in so many words, but in there is we don't require you to build a tunnel. That's a problem because there's unlimited number of extensions if Enbridge wants to keep pushing this tunnel build down the road. Is there any way to close that gap to talk to either through a law or legal or whatever it is to require them? And I know that Governor Whitmer at one point sat down with Enbridge and said, hey, Enbridge, we want a date certain that you're going to get that tunnel built. And Enbridge said no, and they walked away from the table, and then Governor Whitmer sued them. So I'm wondering, what can be done about closing that and holding their feet to the fire about this tunnel, because it's obvious from what everybody talks about, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, as Brian just said, it might happen. But the only thing I would really say about that, and it's been a while since I've read the public acts, is from December of 2018 that created the tunnel, the corridor authority, and authorized the tunnel. But those were statutes that were passed in December of 2018, and two things. Attorney General Nessel did issue an opinion arguing that those acts were not constitutional. Enbridge sued, and the appellate courts sided with Enbridge, and so we lost that lawsuit. The surefire way to change a statute is with new legislation. That's about the only way you can do it. Now, in terms of putting a deadline, I don't think it's constitutional to force someone to build a project, right? But I mean, in terms of you're concerned about the open-ended nature of those statutes that were passed in December of 18 and the waning days of the Snyder administration, and the only way to change a statutory loophole, short of getting it overturned in court, which we were not successful at that, would be with new legislation.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone. I just want to run another round of applause for our amazing panelists for being here tonight. These folks really are doing some of the hardest work in advancing all of the efforts to shut down Line 5 and to reject this oil tunnel proposal. So thank you to each of you for your work. Thank you to everyone who joined us in person and on the live stream. We had so many great questions here tonight, and thanks for hanging with us. I know we stayed a little bit long. But really appreciate your support in being here. And just also finally want to thank our partners, Oil and Water Don't Mix, Sierra Club, and Progress Michigan for helping us to host this event. we just really appreciate the partnership and collaboration. So thank you all. Maybe we'll see you next door. If you did have any burning questions, email me. My contact info is, I think, the last slide here. So please feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. Thank you all.